New concerns today that while the confirmation battle for Todd Blanche as Attorney General was bruising, being President Trump's Attorney General may be tougher. Here's new reaction to the nomination vote from Congressman Jamie Raskin.
He's covered up the Epstein files, totally violating the actual text of the statute that Congress passed. He has done everything he can to implement Donald Trump's utterly lawless $1.8 billion political slush fund, and then the self-pardon that he dealt to himself, his family, and his businesses so that they can't be prosecuted for any tax crimes or any other crimes or any other civil violations they've committed up until this point. Essentially, they've taken Donald Trump's personal attorney and they've made him Donald Trump's personal attorney general.
Let's bring in Molly Jong-Fast, MS Now political analyst and New York Times contributing writer and host of the Fast Politics podcast, and Hayes Brown, MS Now opinion writer and editor. Welcome into both of you. Molly, you heard from Senator Raskin, or Congressman Raskin there, on the long list of things that Blanche has already had to do for Trump. What will Trump ask Blanche to do next?
Well, this is the question for every Trump ally, is what will Trump ask them to do next? And what we've seen is that he doesn't have a huge amount of concern for other people who are not him. And we've even seen this with this interview with Jake Sherman from Punchbowl, where he was saying, they're mad at Republicans, but not me. So it's I think these Republicans have learned it's been a decade of Trumpism, and we've seen them again and again. They've sort of hitched their wagon to Donald Trump. And again, Donald Trump doesn't seem to have much concern for them. Look, I think the most meaningful moment in those hearings with Todd Blanche was when Todd Blanche was asked, if he was the lawyer. He came out and said he was the lawyer for Donald Trump, the personal lawyer for Donald Trump. And the whole point of the job is the Department of Justice is to serve the people, not the president. And so ultimately, I think it's going to be a very tough job for Todd Blanche.
And Hayes, you wrote that this is a big win for Trump, not just installing his former personal lawyer, but also on the IRS settlement agreement. Can Congress still step in here to scuttle that?
Congress can absolutely still step in to scuttle that. The question is, will they? And with the current makeup of the House and Senate, it seems unlikely. The fact that John Cornyn and Thom Tillis allowed their hold essentially on Blanche in the Judiciary Committee to be lifted because Blanche rescinded the order for the $1.8 billion slush fund, like I wrote, they left the IRS deal in place. The slush fund was the easy political target. No one liked that when it came out. It would have been much harder for them to get Blanche to get Trump to agree to get that off the table. So they went the easy route, and now Todd Blanche has been confirmed he's going to be Attorney General. And he's going to have to deal with the fact that Trump makes impossible asks. He asks people to do things that they know cannot be done, but Trump doesn't like to hear the word no. That's why you see these efforts to prosecute his enemies, even though there's nothing that they've done, nothing illegal. There's nothing on the books that could get them prosecuted, but he still insists upon it. So they have to look and hunt and search for ways to make these things come true in a way that inevitably leads to their failure and him being tired of them. So Blanche is in for a rough time.
Yeah, that's a tough job right there. Molly, switching gears here, another senator who did not vote for Todd Blanche is former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He was reportedly released from a rehab facility on Thursday amid new questions about his health and his ability to serve in Congress. Why has there been no video to reassure his constituents?
It's a real question. Everything we've gotten from Mitch McConnell's camp is a sort of trust me thing, right? We got those two pictures. We were told he was released from rehab, but we have not seen him. We have not gotten anything else. And we're asked to just trust them, which, again, it's just a sort of very unusual situation. And the governor of Kentucky, a Democrat, was, talking about having him perhaps, make a statement, something like a video or an audio. And we did not see that, And so, look, there's going to be, he's not running for re-election. There is already a plan here. I think that there was some thinking that maybe they could put in, that there might be a special election. I think that Congress is now out. They're going to be back for 3 weeks before the midterms. I mean, I think that this, it's too bad that we have to sort of, we have to live under this cloak of silence where we don't really know what's happening with our elected officials. But at this point, there has not been reporting that has bared out what has happened with him.
Still so many questions surrounding and if they're going to let the clock run out here. Hayes, this is interesting. The Atlantic has a new report on what McConnell did as majority leader, pushing through Trump's nominees, and more than any other person influenced the selection of judges who will shape America for decades. But the article says that McConnell detests Trump. So why did he do so much to cement Trump's political legacy?
Party. That has been the one guiding star of Mitch McConnell's entire career, has been to try to benefit his vision for the Republican Party, which is not to say that he's an ideologue, which is not to say that he has a true view of what the shape of the party should be. Basically, from the time that he joined the GOP, started to swing right. He joined at the time when there was still a liberal wing of the Republican Party, but he saw where the wind was blowing and he moved to the right to join them. He'd made a test Trump, but he knows, or at least knew, that the way to maintain power and influence was not to go against the tide in this case. He knew that the overwhelming forces that pushed Trump into office were too strong to resist. So he decided that he would just kind of go along with the flow and try and shape the party in the way that he still saw fit. How much of a success he's had on that front remains to be seen. But like the Atlantic pointed out, it's been very clear, he is the architect of the current Supreme Court majority, almost super majority for the conservatives on the Supreme Court. He's the architect of the strategy we'll get rid of part of the filibuster that lets us confirm as many federal judges as we want and cabinet members, but not let people legislate with the majority vote. So that, I think, has been his legacy. And I think that even though he hates Trump, he knew that for the party to survive, he could not, or at least for himself to continue to give power to the party, he could not put himself on the bench that way.
Yeah, why does anybody continue to kowtow to Trump if they disagree with him? Self-preservation. Molly Jong-Fast and Hayes Brown, thank you.